Hello everyone and welcome to the video. In this video I'm going to be showing you how to animate any type of character, whether it be top down or platformer character in GDevelop. Now before I begin, if you're a complete beginner or a complete newbie as they say it to GDevelop, you can use the link in the description and join the Q crew and get access to a free beginner course. But other than that, let's start the video. Now, what we're going to be doing in this video is using what we call finite state machines to animate a character. In this video, we're going to be using a platformer character as an example, but what I'm showing here will work for any type of character, no matter whether it be top down or any type of game, it will work for them. And it'll even work for enemies as well. Now, as a setup, I have a ground object. I'm going to drag this onto the screen. If I double click into it, you see I have a behavior, and I just added a platform behavior to it. So now that I have this ground, we're going to set up a basic platformer to start things off. So I'm going to stretch it out. And we also have a player object. And right now, this is just a basic sprite. It has no animations right now. And the behavior that it has is a platformer object behavior. So if you want to follow exactly how I'm doing, you can set this up real fast. And I set the acceleration to be really high, but that doesn't really matter here. But now since we have the player, we want to start importing the animations. That's the first step of animating any character. We need the animations on the object. Now, you can go to the link in the description. It's a Google Drive link, and that will include all of the same animations that I'm using. But once again, you can use this for any of your characters in any of your games. So I'm going to import the image, and I'm going to go into my pictures, and then I'm going to go into my game sprites. And this is where I have my sprites saved. Now I'm going to use the idle sprite of this frog, and there's a platformer character, so I'm going to click it. And the way that you can get all of the animations at once, you can click the first one, then hold shift, and then click the last one. But of course, if you want to do this, make sure that your sprites are in order of the chronological order of which one should play first. So I'm going to open it, and here we go. Now we have the idle animation. Now, you have the animation name, and the animation name is actually optional, but I recommend that you make an animation name because there's two ways you can call on animations. You can either call on them using numbers, or you can call on them using the name. As you can see right here, this animation is number 0. But it's better to call on them using the name because it makes it easier to read the events. So we're going to call on it using the name. I'm going to hit apply, and if I drag it on to the screen, I hit apply, and I'm going to size up the character to be 100 by 100 pixels. And let's put them up here now and preview it. And let's see what happens now. And now that we have the character, you'll see that it played the animation once, but it didn't play it again. And that's because we need to actually make the animation loop. Common animations that loop are the idle animation and things like running. But of course, it depends on your game whether or not you want to loop it. But all you have to do to loop it is simply click this checkbox, loop, and it'll automatically loop. So now we have that animation, and we're going to set up the rest of the animations. We're going to add a few more. I'm going to make this one called the run animation. We're not going to have that many for this tutorial. I'm going to go up and then make the run animation. And I'm going to click it. And I'm going to hit shift and open all of them at the same time. And the thing about GDevelop, I wanted to show this on purpose, is because I'm not sure if this is just my computer or is it just me or if this is a GDevelop issue, but for some reason, I guess since some of the sprites are shared between these animations, it creates a little weird little glitch thing that happens. So for this, whenever this happens, and if this even happens for you, whenever this type of glitch happens, you need to individually add all of the sprites for that animation. So I'm going to speed this part up. Now that we have all the animations for the run, I'm going to add the animation for the jumping animation, and I'm going to add the last one after that, which is the falling animation. I'm going to double click here, add the jump animation, and then I'm also going to add one last animation, and this will be the falling animation. It's just simply 4 animations as a test. Now I'm going to name all these animations. We already have the first 2 names, so let's make sure we name the rest of them as well, as a good general practice. And we have, well, that's the jump animation. We have the jump animation, and then we have the fall animation. So now that we have all these set up, we have all the 4 animations. Now we are done with that animation setup. Now the next thing we need to do is actually set up our finite state machine. Now before we do a finite state machine, it's good to know why we use them. And it's because when you normally activate animations using variables in the event editor, what happens is as you make a bigger game, especially if you're having a really, really big game, when you're using variables, you have to constantly toggle on this variable. For example, let's say you have a variable that triggers the idle animation called isIdle. Okay, that's good. But if you make animations for attacking, for jumping, in order for those animations to play, you have to toggle off the idle animation and then toggle on the other animations. And when you have all these variables, if you even mess up one toggle, your game will start glitching and it's very hard to troubleshoot. And another thing about finite state machines is that you can transition into other states. It really simplifies everything. And when you're in that certain state, let's say I'm in the idle state, not only can you play animations, you can also activate other actions depending on what state you're in. Now, this is going to make more sense when I actually start to set it up. And the way you set up a finite state machine, there's nothing in GDevelop that's actually called a finite state machine. You use what's called external events to set up a finite state machine. So let's go into our project manager here. And this is on the top left corner. You have the project manager. And you'll see if you scroll down, you see the external events tab. And I can click the plus on the external events. And now I have a new one. Now we're going to set up an external event for each of our animations. Whenever you have an animation, you want to set up an external event for that animation. And I like to call them states in the way that we're using them. Now I'm going to call this one player idle. And the reason why I'm putting player idle is because you can also use this for animations for enemies. So you don't want to just call it idle because an enemy might have an idle animation. We're going to call this player idle. I'm going to add 3 more. This is going to be called player run. The next one is going to be called player jump. And the last one will be called player fall. So I'm going to set up player jump. The final one will be called player fall. Player fall. So now that we have all these external events, we also need a way to actually call on these events. Because right now we don't have anything in these events. So I'm going to click into our player idle external event. And you have to choose the scene that you want it on. Now, it doesn't mean they're limited to one scene. This can still work even if you create other scenes. So don't worry about that too much. But now we have this new external event. Now, actually, we're going to start off, before we start calling them in the event editor, because they have to be called on, we're actually going to set up the idle state. And now, whenever you have a state, there are 2 parts of that state. You have the actions that need to be done. For example, the action would be for us to change into our idle animation. And then you have the transitioning conditions. And these transitioning conditions will be for what conditions need to happen for me to transition into another state. For example, running. Now, before we do this, we want to also set up a variable. And I should have did this earlier. But we go into our project manager, go into our scenes, edit scene variables, and add a new variable. This will be called state. And depending on what number this is, because this is going to be a number variable, depending on what number state is, we're going to want to change our external event. We want to change our external event to, let's say, for example, player idle to player run. Now we're going to keep this as 0 by default, and 0 will be for our idle state. Now let's set up the foundation of our state. I'm going to add 2 event groups, and this may seem very complicated, but trust me, this is better in the long term for your game, and it actually becomes much simpler to handle as your game gets bigger. So we're going to add 2 things. I'm going to add an event group for the actions that we want to be done, and then I'm going to also add another event group for the transitions that we want to happen, for transitioning into different states. So now that we have these 2, I'm also going to create one more container. I'm going to create an event group. I'm going to call this event group, I'm going to call it foundation. And the reason why I'm doing this, we're going to drag this foundation to the top, and we want to drag our actions and our transitions under this. And the reason why I'm doing this is because when we create other states, we want to just be able to copy this and then paste it into another one of our states or external events. So now let's get right down to business. Let's get into the actions. So I'm going to drag this condition up here and drag it under the actions tab. And we want to make the action. Now, when the action that we want to happen, whenever we're in the state 0 or we're in the player idle, for example, when the state variable equals 0, which is the idle animation, we want to simply just play the idle animation. So let's just do that right now. Let's add an action, click into our player, and if I scroll down, you can see the animation. We can either change it by number or change it by name. We're going to change it by name, and let's change it to idle. So this will happen when we're in that idle state. So that's great and all. But right now, we want to be able to test this and tell whether or not this is working, because by default, we're in the idle state. So let's also set up a transition. Now, transitioning, we also need some actions for that. We need conditions and actions for the transition states. So let's add a new event. Now, let's think about logically. If we want to go from idle into running, what do we have to do? Well, our player has to be on the ground, and our player has to be moving. Now, keep in mind, This will work for any type of game, whether it be top down or platformer. But you personally have to decide what the conditions are that need to be met in order for your animation to change, in order for your state to change, so a new animation can play. So this is dependent on your game, but in a platformer circumstance, this will be how it works. I'm going to add a condition, click into our player, and I'm going to scroll down to where it says if we're on the floor, our player has to be on the ground first, and so I'm going to put events control flow, and if our player is moving. So I'm going to scroll down. We want to check if our player is on the floor, and if our player is moving, then we want to change the variable state to be equal to 1. We want to be saying it equal to 1. So I'm going to add an action, and I'm going to go into other actions, and we want to change the variable. So we're going to put variable, change variable value, state. We're going to set this as equal if it's equal to 1. So we now have if player is on the floor and player is moving, we want to change our state to be equal to 1. We want to set it to be equal to 1. Now you may be wondering, okay, what's going on with this state thing? Why does this state variable even matter? Well, that's because we have to use this state to call on these external events. External events are normally not active unless they're called upon in the scene. So how do we actually call upon these states? Well, this is very easy. Let's go back into our untitled scene, the events that are contained here, and we need to make a condition. If the state is equal to 0, then we want to call on our idle events. This is going to make more sense when I do it. So let me add a condition, other conditions, and we want to check if our variable state is equal to 0. So we can check it right now. If it's equal to 0, then what? Then we want to activate our state. But if you go into actions, there's no actions for activating an external event. So what do? Well, you create a sub-event. And you can do this by clicking the event and then and then typing shift, and then you can put D, shift D, and then you have a sub-event. Now, what do we want to do now? There's two ways you can link an external event. You can either right-click, go into add, and link external event, or you can go up to the top right with this plus symbol, and you can click and then link external event. And you'll see that now we'll have an external event sub-condition, and then you can choose which one you want to change to. We want to change the player idle when our state is equal to 0. And since we're already here, let's set it up for all 4 of our animations. I'm going to copy and paste this a few times. And since we have 4 animations, let's do it this amount of times. So now we want to set, if our state is equal to 1, then we want to make it link our run external events. If our state is equal to 2, we want to link our jump external events. And if our state is set to 3, you can figure out by now, we want to set our player to be equal to falling in terms of the event that we want to include. Make sure that this is completely correct. Because if you mess up anything with the states or with the events you want to include, of course it won't work right. So now you can see that depending on our state, now it will start calling on this event. So basically when our state is equal to 0, all of the events in here will start to run. And when our state is equal to 1, all of the events inside player run, they will all run. So this is great. So now we can transition to state 1. But right now, remember, our state 1 is player run. And that can be kind of confusing. I'm going to say it one more time. State 1 is the player run external event. So let's go into player run. And I'm going to add an event. And once again, we can copy and paste our foundation and use this as a way to speed up the process of creating our external events. So now we have the foundation. Now the action that we want to happen, when we're in the run state, you can see what we want to do now. Now we want to change our player animation to be equal to run. Now the transition is going to be a little bit different. When we're in the run state, we want to be able to transition back into our idle state if we're not moving. So remember, you have to think of the conditions. Remember, this all depends on your game. But in terms of a platformer, in order for us to be idle, we have to not only be on the ground, but we have to also be not moving. So let's go check back on our event right here. We can see our players on floor and our players moving. So how do we make it check so if it's not moving? Simple. You just invert the condition. That's all you do. So now we're checking if our player is on the floor and if our player is not moving. Then you want to change our variable state. We want to set it equal to 0 this time. Because remember, 0 is our idle state. And before I preview the game, before I preview the game, I'm going to go into our run animation. I forgot to loop it. So you make sure your run animation is looped if you have an animation for that. Make sure it's looped. So I'm going to hit apply and let's preview this and see if it works. So I'm going to use the arrow keys to move, and if I start moving, you'll see that I'll start running. And if I start moving to the left, I also start running. Don't worry about why he's not flipping. I'm not setting up flipping here. You can check that out on a platformer tutorial that I made, but we don't really need the flipping. We're worrying about animations right now. But right now we can transition between our idle and our run state flawlessly. We can flawlessly transition between them. Now, technically, that is the end. That right there, what I just showed you, is the foundation of all animations. But I'm going to finish up the idle, not the idle. I'm going to finish up the running and the falling and the jumping. I want to finish up all of these to show you how you can still handle everything when there's more than 2 animations, because I don't want to just leave off on a really, really simple example when games are more complicated than that. So let's finish it off for our idle, our running, our jumping, and our falling. Now let's go into our jumping state. Let's open that up and choose the scene. And then let's open up our falling state. Now remember, whenever you're creating new states, you have to be able to figure out, okay, let's say for example I'm in the idle state. You have to be able to ask yourself, when I'm in the idle state, what are the other possible states that I can be in? And for this example, for a platformer, whenever I'm idle, there are actually only 2 possibilities. I can either transition into running or I can transition into jumping. There's no way that I can transition into the falling. So I don't have to actually put a transition for the fall animation, because there's no way that I can go from idle into falling. Well, actually, there is a way if a platform disappears. So we're going to put that in here. You have to really think about it correctly, because if I would have just rushed and did that, that can lead to some bugs in your game. So now we have to make transition from the idle into all of these. So we already have it set up for the idle state, changing into the run state. So now let's do it for the jumping. And it's pretty easy to set up. If I go and click to my transition, click Shift A to add a new event under it. What if the transition condition, and a lot of things are rhyming today, but what if the transition condition that we need to add for it to go into our jump state? Well, for a platformer, it's very simple because there's pre-built conditions for that. Let's add a condition, click into our player, and let's check if the player is jumping. That's all we have to do. And if the player is jumping, we want to set our state. I'm going to click it, copy it, and there's a good way to speed the process up. Let's set our state as being equal to 2. And we can do something similar for the falling animation. Let's add a new event under. And if our player is falling, and it's very easy for it to do with a platformer behavior, if our player is falling, let's set the state as being equal to 3 now. If our player is falling, let's set it to being equal to 3. So now we can go from the idle animation to any one of these states now. Any one of these states. And the same thing, we have to do the same thing for the running animation. And it's pretty easy for us to do with the running animation because it's the same transition as the idle. So let's copy the jumping condition or the jumping event, and let's paste it here. Let's paste it in our running transition. Same thing for falling, because when you're in the running animation, you can either jump, or if you fall off a platform, you'll start falling. So we need to be able to transition into both of those. So let's copy our falling event, and let's paste it. Let's paste it. And I'm going to put it in order just for organization, kind of an organization freak. But we have it right here. We have the transitions. So now running can transition to jump and fall, and idle can transition into jump and fall. And you see, this is still very tidy. Not that many events. And when we look at our untitled scene, this event, there's barely anything here. It's just our finite state machine. That's all that it is. So let's go into our player jump, because now that we have the state, we have to have things that actually happen when we're in that state. We have to have things that happen when we're in that state. So let's add an event, and let's copy and paste the foundation of our idle, and let's put it in our jump event, our jump events. So let's paste it here. And the action, this is very simple. When we're jumping, we want to just change the animation to be equal to jump. Now, we have to change these transitions a little bit, because when we're jumping, there are a few things we can transition to. We can either transition into falling, or we can transition into really nothing else. When we're jumping, we can really only transition into falling. That's really the only thing we can do. Because when we're rising up, we're not going to be on the floor when we're rising up. We have to be falling first. We have to be falling first. Now, if you want to be safe with it, you could technically make transitions for all of them. But in our case, I don't see jumping transitioning into running because you haven't started falling yet. So for the jumping, the only transition we have to do is the transitioning into falling. So we're going to delete these. Going to delete these. And actually, there's really no reason to delete them because just in case. So let's not delete any of them except for the jumping, because we don't want to transition from jumping to jump. That doesn't even make any sense. So now we have it so the jump can either transition into idle or it can transition into the falling animation. And you could make it transition to run if you want, but I don't really care about doing it right now because it doesn't really matter. So let's do it for the falling animation. Let's click into our foundation, copy it, and then add an event, and let's paste the foundation. Now that we have the foundation pasted, once again, the animation that we want to happen is fall. The animation we want to happen is fall. And the transition, when we're falling, we can either transition into idle animation or we can transition into the running animation. Now we already have the running animation transition because you can see that right here. 1 represent the run, and that rhymes. You can remember it that way. 1 represent the run. I'm getting it confused. 1 represent the run. Okay, so we don't want to transition from falling into falling. So let's go into our idle. And let's go into our run and click into that. And we want to do it transition into our idle now. So let's copy this and paste it into fall. So these are our transitions. Now I hope everything made sense right now, but let's preview. And then we're going to do a review. I really don't mean to rhyme all these words. Preview, and then we're going to do a review. But, okay. We're going to start testing. And now, okay, our running works. Okay, cool. Now let's see if I jump. Okay, the jumping works. I jump and I fall. And if I'm running, I can jump and then I can fall. And of course, ignore me not flipping. But all of the animations correctly work. And this is great. Notice how we saved a lot of time, because if we're dealing with variables, we would have to make it so, and no matter what animation we're in, we have to toggle off all of the other animations whenever we're playing one of them, even though there's no possible way we can transition between certain ones. So let's do a review. The first thing we did, we set up our animations. Then we had our state variable. You always want to have a state variable. And this is for any game. You have a state variable for your player. And this state, you can make it start off as being equal to 0. Then, after you do that, the next thing you want to do is you set it up like this. You set it up as each state number will call on one of these external events. It will call on one of your external events. And of course, they have to be created first. And you create your external events for all of the animation that you want. Remember, each animation or each state that we're in, it has actions that happen and it has transitions that happen. The actions are for changing your animation, but these can also include other things depending on your game. But the actions are for changing your animation, and the transitions are very important. This is the most important part of this entire video. The transitions are very important because depending on your game, the conditions that make you move into other animations will depend on your game. But for a platformer, they'll look something like this. So when you transition, depending on what conditions you have, it will change your state. And remember, each one of your animations have to be able to flow between each other. I have to be able to have a way to get from idle to run and then back to the other animations. They have to all flow between each other. But as you make a bigger game with lots and lots of animations, this will really help you out. This is a very great way to do it. And once you get better at it, it doesn't take that long to set up. Because, of course, it took me a little bit long because I'm explaining it to all the viewers. But if you're setting this up on your own, it does not take long at all. So that is how you use finite state machines as the best way to set up animations for any types of games. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed the content, if you learned something from it, make sure to subscribe, first of all, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on any of my new videos or courses that are coming up. Once again, if you're a complete beginner to game development, you can join the No Code Revolution, which is the name of my course. You can get that for free by joining the Q Crew, which is my email list in the description. You can get that course for free. Or if you want to support me, you can buy it on Udemy, but more than likely you probably want to get it for free. But also make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, not only just to help out the algorithm, but if you truly did like the video, make sure to like it, and comment down below what tutorials you would like to see in the future. The next tutorial will be an isometric platformer, so please stay tuned for that video. But there are many more tutorials and courses coming up in the future. Once again, I hope you all enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something from it, and I'll catch you in the next tutorial. See ya.